I've got. I set aside 45 minutes. If we can get it done in 30, that would be great. Do you think? Anyway, let's see how we go.
Did you see my questions?
Yes, I did. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Before we start, I just want to express my gratitude for these two books that I actually wasn't aware of. I just recently found them in the Watford Library. So your two books, I was so impressed, and I wrote to Kate that I have read so many books on coaching, but these two are really, really special, and I was so happy to be able to read them.
Well, thank you. Firstly, I'm delighted they're in the Watford Library. That's terrific. What was it, because you've written other books, you've read other books on coaching, Alex, what was it that you particularly liked or, enjoyed or thought was valuable about them?
Somehow you have covered the things that I'm interested in. I'm very much interested in leadership coaching.
Yes.
And executive coaching, and at the same time in super coaching you have given everything that I could find in other books, but even more, and you have covered all different areas of interest, at least my interest, all tools, all benefits of coaching, then different ways of different ways of approaching clients, and but especially what I like is that you insist that coach must have a coach.
Yes.
And he has to work on himself.
Yes.
And that's not everyone stresses this. I think this is very, very nice.
Okay. Well, thank you. I very much appreciate your comments. Thanks, Alex. So, shall we work through your questions? Is that the best way to do it for you?
Yes.
Okay, what I've done is I've made notes on each of your questions. What I suggest is let me respond to, a question at a time, and then if you want to ask additional questions, just, or challenge or you want more explanation, just butt in any time you like.
Yes.
Okay?
Okay, so you have them in front of you.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Alex. Yeah. Your first question was, what is super coaching?
Yes.
And it was a conscious attempt on my part to differentiate in some way in the marketplace and, with other definitions of coaching and so on. And what I mean by it is what appears in the super coaching book right at the end, which is a vision statement. And there's a couple of things that I want to highlight. So my differentiation of super coaching is really in three ways. One is measurable results. Now, I'm not saying that's unique to super coaching, but I stress measurability of coaching.
Yes.
Secondly, if we're talking about business coaching or executive coaching, that it's in alignment with what the business needs, as well as obviously meeting the personal agenda. So it's in alignment with the business agenda would be a second description of super coaching.
Or distinction.
Yes. And then the third would be that super coaching is about taking people beyond what they thought was possible for themselves. So in that sense, it's, if you like, transformational.
Okay.
So that's my differentiation. Measurability, aligning the personal coaching agenda with the business need, if we're talking about business coaching, and, as I say, going beyond what people thought was possible for themselves.
Yes. So this covers also my second question.
Yes, I thought it did, with one enhancement, Alex. Super coaching, for me, is about performance, i.e. short-term results and performance in life or in business. So that's a performance dimension. It's about development and learning, so that's about helping the person develop themselves, either in a skill sense or in a personality sense or in a confidence sense or whatever, or indeed even perhaps in a wisdom sense, so helping them develop. And then the third dimension would be the dimension of fulfillment or satisfaction. So my experience, if one asks most people what they want in life or in their work, and you say to them, would you rather have results or fulfillment or enjoyment, almost anybody answers that question they'd like both. And so I believe and want to stress that, to me, coaching, super coaching, irrespective of the agenda, should be helping people in those three dimensions: performance, development and fulfillment, and quite what the balance between those three is will vary from coachee to coachee. Okay.
One thing I really noticed or was impressed by, and I didn't find in other places, is this: you have this question: do you have results in your life, or you want excuses why you don't have results?
Yes, exactly. I think we all, or at least certainly my experience of people, is that we have an incredible ability to rationalize or excuse why certain things happen or don't happen. And my experience is that somebody that's really very focused on what they want to achieve and very, has a high degree of persistence and will and drive and so on, and doesn't let the excuses and the reasons get in the way, has a high probability of achieving those things. Another way to say that, Alex, would be, I've coached all sorts of people that say they would like things in their lives. For business people, they often talk about that they want a better work-life balance, or they might talk about they'd like a different career. They might talk about they want to set up a business, etc. Lots of people have lots of good ideas about, ideas for businesses or ideas for leisure activities or whatever. And I guess the point I'm making is ideas, while a start point, are valueless unless they're followed through on. And it's very easy to... Again, a different way to say that is it's quite easy to get into the victim mentality in life and kind of put the blame on the way things are, on circumstances or other people or whatever.
Okay.
So that's that's just embellishing what you were drawing attention to, Alex.
Yeah, in your two books I have found some really, really deep questions that I didn't find with other coaches. Although I don't want to undermine other coaches, they have many good things to learn from. But sometimes I'm sharing with my friends or people are coached, and they really got them kind of hit them,
Yes.
Because I think they're actually the result of a long time experience in working with people, and they're very, very deep.
Well, thank you for saying that. I have been working with people. I mean, you will have seen perhaps some of this in the books in terms of my background, but I spent a lot of time, and it actually relates to one of your later questions. I spent a lot of time, in quotes, working on myself, meaning that I went to lots of encounter groups and Gestalt and psychosynthesis and all sorts of things, which were fairly fresh, in the 60s and 70s. And also I studied widely Eastern thought and Eastern mysticism and so on. Went to see various gurus without ever, sort of signing up for anybody, as it were. So I think that's clearly influenced my work. That's one answer. So hopefully some of that is in what I do. And I think the other way and plus I've done obviously thousands of hours of working with people, and have found those questions to be very useful for people. So part of my staying with those kind of rather deeper questions is that they seem to have been very valuable to people, and questions that are very easy not to ask yourself in the busyness of life and so on. And the third observation I'd make is, what I'm really, while I these days work almost exclusively in the world of business, what I'm actually trying to help people do is to live more fulfilled, more successful, more happy lives. In other words, I'm about working with people rather than working with business per se.
Okay.
Now, I think there's a huge correlation between people that are focused and their life is in some sort of balance, and they're enjoying what they do, and they have good working relationships, and they're open and honest and so on. I think there's a high correlation between that and business success. So it's not that I'm sort of covertly working in businesses on my own agenda for people, but it's so I'm absolutely committed, if I'm working for a corporation, to connecting my work, as I said earlier, with the business agenda. But fundamentally, what's all underneath it all is I want to help people, as in quotes, as human beings, going through their work life or going through their life.
Yeah, life is different aspects of our lives are interrelated very closely.
Well, precisely, yes.
Just separate them.
Exactly.
One thing that that is, again, to add to my previous
yes.
comment in the beginning, that is really distinct, so to say, is that you seem to be very flexible. Like, you can adjust to any client. You can even adjust your schedule. You can, I think this is exactly what I needed for my work. What I need for my work. I have to be very flexible working with people who are extremely busy.
Yes.
And being completely open and not having any, stiff system how to coach them and say, if you don't buy into this, then I'm not going to coach you like this. So I think a good coach or super coach should be very, very flexible, because he is basically a servant of people. He wants to serve people to help them succeed.
Yes, you've triggered all of that. I agree with wholeheartedly. One other distinction that I would make for a super coach, Alex, I should have mentioned this earlier on, you just reminded me, is that a super coach will ensure, or a coachee working with a super coach will get value from that interaction every time. In other words, you don't have to wait in coaching for a number of sessions to get value. I believe people are giving up their precious time in life to a coaching session and to a coach. My view is that the coachee, if asked, should always be able to say that session had value, and sometimes that value will be worth the time and money spent, and sometimes it will be much more profound than that. So in other words, sometimes somebody will report that session, had a profound effect in my life or my work life. Sometimes it's a more modest set of outcomes from a meeting. But I do think a super coach ought to be a distinction would be that no matter who they're working with, in no matter what situation, on no matter what topics, that session will provide value, and not value as measured by the coach, but as measured by the coachee.
Yes, one thing I remember from your book is that some of your clients, they said that they should be paying you more.
Yes, that was a staggering. This is one of the paradoxes. Is sometimes people don't know what the value is going to get, or one of the ironies is before they work with me, and it can seem expensive and so on. But then they report getting a multiple of that value. And there was that famous occasion when, after a glass or two of wine, a client did say that to me, that I ought to be charging more, which was it was very interesting at the time and got me to think very hard about, well, what is the multiple of value that these kind of sessions ought to be delivering?
That's really unique, actually. Very rarely one can hear something like that from clients. They usually always think that they are charged more than they get.
Yes, I just back to your flexibility point. I do think I think some sort of framework is important. So, in other words, how long are we going to work together? The duration of sessions, what happens in sessions, a sort of outer framework. The way I would say that is that when we go onto a tennis court, we don't have any choice about where the lines are and how the scoring works.
Yes.
So there is a framework there within which the opportunity to play tennis is almost unlimited in terms of style and tactics and so on. So I do think that some outer boundaries or guidelines, a framework for coaching is very important. But within that, I think we have to, great coaches are able to operate in the realm of unknowing, the role of the realm of emergence, the realm of ambiguity and flexibility.
Yes.
And I think if we try and constrain, it's a bit like trying to constrain. Life is unconstrainable. It has a sort of ongoing flow to it that I don't know that you can put too many boundaries around. So that was a rather elaborate way of saying also the type of people I work with. I have to meet them and serve them, work with them where they are to some extent, so hence the flexibility around where we work, when we work, duration of when we work.
Yes.
All within, having said all that, there are certain must-haves. One must-have is genuine commitment on their part to want. They may not have that genuine commitment very strongly at the start, but at least they're willing to, in quotes, suck it and see with the coaching. In other words, they're not engaging with me reluctantly. So they do have to be committed, and they do have to be committed to value and for owning whatever the agenda is that we're working on. They also have to be responsible, or they have to commit to a regularity of contact. I've never found out how to coach people if I never have any contact with them. I'm working on that. That would be great. But so far I haven't achieved that. So in other words, it's not that they never reschedule sessions or whatever, but if that happens too much, it makes. I don't think the level of commitment on their side is there. So flexibility I think is absolutely paramount. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. One thing that I learned from SUPERCOACHING book is Ben was explaining how somebody was cynical about coaching, and then he just went there, and then the guy was so impressed after the session. So when I started learning about coaching, I found one lady was coaching me an email, and she has this questionnaire that she sends to people. It's called "Are you ready for coaching?"
Yes.
And she has like 10 questions.
Yes.
And if people have more than 2 no's, then they are not ready.
Yes.
But here, from your book, and I think also there is one example with you, one with Ben, that some people were cynical or skeptical about coaching, but after meeting you, they changed this in a positive sense.
Yes.
So this is the thing that I kind of didn't do. In my work over the last few years, because I was thinking I just want to work with serious people, but sometimes it seems that people who doesn't seem serious, they become serious after they experience coaching.
Yes, sometimes I don't think they can be serious until they've experienced it. The analogy is people can tell me how great parachute jumping is and how much it'll be, a a phenomenal experience in my life, and my life will never be quite the same again. But I am absolutely convinced that until I jump out of the plane, I'm never going to know. And I do feel the same about, all I need people to do is to be at the point of, as I said earlier, I will suck this and see. I'm not quite sure what I'll get out of this coaching. This guy, i.e. in this case me, seems okay. I can connect with him, and he certainly has a track record, but I don't really understand what coaching is, and I don't really understand what I'm going to get, but at least I'm willing to give it a try. And I think sometimes only once they've given it a try will they really topple over into an enthusiasm and a commitment. And on occasions I have, in initial meetings with people before they've made a commitment to coaching, just said, why don't we turn this into a coaching session for half an hour, and then you can evaluate. Or, I might say, although I seldom have to do that these days, I might say, let's have a further meeting at no charge to you where I'll do a coaching session, and then you'll be able to commit or not. I want to just pick up on some people aren't, the questionnaire that person sends out, and some, if they answer 2 no's, they're not ready. I come from a slightly different place to that. I do think anybody, anytime, can potentially get value out of coaching, and it's just a question of whether they see it at the time. So in a sense they are always ready, but they don't. It's a bit like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't get it to drink. And I feel the same. I genuinely think that a good coach with a committed coachee, there will always be value for people. And then it's just a question of, do they see it now, and are they willing to make that step? So it's just slightly, that may get us back to the same place. She may say that it's just they're not ready yet.
So through your books and through what you're saying, what I can sense of here, I can sense a very, very strong enthusiasm and dedication to helping clients succeed in their lives. And I think it naturally brings us to our third question.
Yes.
What is it that keeps you in this profession for such a long time?
Yes. One thing I want to say, it's not about exclusive, particularly, is it's not really about, thinking. I hope it's an authentic interest rather than what am I trying to say here? What I don't think it is what a wonderful thing I'm doing. I'm doing something that's much better than the taxi driver. Everybody ought to be saving people in life. It's not about that. Why I do what I do, and it stayed fresh is pure and simply because I get a lot of positives out of it. So there's a high correlation between the value that people describe getting out of it and what I get out of it. I get out of it a lot of personal satisfaction, a lot of, I suppose over the years, a lot of learning. I've earned a good living from it, so I get a lot from it. And the reason I think it stayed fresh, and it has for more than 20 years, particularly one-to-one. I mean, I do team coaching and I do other things, but speeches and consultancy. But my great love has probably always been and continues to be one-to-one. Firstly, one reason is that while the topics that I address with people, in many cases I've addressed many times before, the unique person opposite me in their unique circumstances, in that unique moment in the coaching session, is unique. It will never return. So it's always in that sense fresh. It's an emergent process, as I said earlier. So it's a kind of creative and unpredictable process. So it doesn't, for me, get into predictability, boredom, a mechanical process.
So interesting.
It's very intimate, meaning that I see people being much more themselves and much realer and much more open and honest than in many interactions that go on in life. And I think people, when they are them, you know, when you peel away, you get behind the sort of the layers of the onion. There is something special about that sort of honest and open communication with people, and people just describing themselves the way they are is precious, and so there's that keeps it fresh. I'm fascinated by. It is not easy, I think, it's not actually easy for people to find their way in life. Maybe it's never been easy, but I think it's not easy these days. Certainly in the circles I move in, the stresses and strains on the kind of executives that I work with, they need to be. You know, some of the challenges are very intellectually stretching. Some of them are very energetically stretching. You know, they need vast reservoirs of energy. They need creativity. They need high-level human, you know, qualities, etc., etc. They need to balance it with demands outside work. This is not an easy game, and I think there's a stimulation that keeps me fresh, which is how can people find their way? It's almost like, how can they be the eye in the middle of the hurricane, the maelstrom? How can they be at peace and successful and focused and so on within a context that seems to be pretty difficult to it's pretty difficult to live that way. So I think that's both sort of intellectually stimulating for me and feels like a valuable thing to be doing in the world we live in.
So can we say that you find pleasure in seeing them become stronger and seeing them becoming unstuck?
Yes, and exactly, and I think, while I think, you know, the occasional, you know, people vary hugely on how much feedback they give me. Some are quite reticent. It's just their style. You know, they're not in the habit of giving all that much positive feedback, and I have to probe a bit to see what they're getting from the coaching. Other people are much more effusive, much more talkative, you know, much more open than that. It is very gratifying when somebody gives very positive feedback about the value they've got, not just in terms of their business, but the value they've got in a very kind of personal sense, right. In their, you know, in a fundamentally large part of their life, i.e. their work life, and often they describe that it has spillover benefits into other aspects of their life.
Did you think about my fourth question? Now, it maybe sounds like an easy question, but I think it's not an easy question. So, what is most exciting thing for you about coaching?
I think the most exciting thing, I'll answer it in two ways. The most exciting thing, I suspect it's rather like an actor feels when they're out on the edge of. It feels. What's exciting is to be on a journey in a coaching session of discovery, right, without knowing quite what will emerge when. That feels, I mean, it doesn't feel scary particularly now, but it used to feel very scary. And it feels like beyond the edge of predictability and frameworks and so on. And that to me is an exciting journey.
You mean scary for you or for the coachee?
It's not very scary for me now because I've been there a lot. I mean, it's not to say that I don't. No, it's not scary for me now. There's a certain adrenaline kind of rush to some of it, in a small way, but it's not scary. For the coachee, it can be scary sometimes if we are addressing big questions for them, because the implications of some of the questions are not are going to be profound. You know, if we're looking at, should somebody leave the job they're in, for instance, that is a scary prospect for some people. I don't think it's scary necessarily. I think the topics and the questions are sometimes scary for coachees, not by any means always. I think the other excitement is the excitement of doing something that is beyond my wildest dreams about what I would do, and sometimes I have to literally kind of pinch myself to realize that I'm working with some of the best known business people in the country or in the world in some cases, and have worked with, you know, very well known sports people and so on. So it's the excitement of doing something that feels right for me, so it feels very much me, but is also beyond anything I imagined for myself.
You mentioned discovery. What is this? What is it that you discover in people that is exciting, that is valuable?
Well, one thing that is validated every day. I find it exciting that people have immense capabilities within themselves to answer the. While I don't think that I'm not in the school of thought about coaching that the only thing you can ever do is ask questions. I do think that the capacity of people to resolve their own difficulties, to make decisions, to develop capabilities, etc. The human potential is enormous, and that's exciting.
Can we say that coaching facilitates people becoming self-reliant, self-sufficient, and maybe even connected with something in themselves, some intelligence that they have within, but they're not tapping into every day?
Absolutely, very, very well said, Alex, exactly. And I would add that maybe it's implicit, or it's the root to what you've said, self-aware, more self-aware. So it's self-awareness that leads to, it's self-awareness and insight that leads to more self-reliance, tapping into something that's there all the time, but they don't have access to all the time, and so on.
So self-awareness would precede self-reliance or self-sufficiency?
I think so.
Okay, that's interesting, yes. Can we move, because of the time constraint, can we move on to the fifth question? How would you describe your best client?
Yes, the way I answered that was, as a generic best question, would be somebody that is willing to be, firstly, somebody that's very high level these days. It's not that I haven't worked with any, you know, I've worked with people, I think, throughout the social spectrum and so on, and ages, etc. But these days, my best client would be somebody that's a very high-profile, high-level individual with sort of big challenges and so on. So that would be generically just, it's partly a place that I think I can play at and add the most value. Not everybody can sort of operate there. Secondly, somebody that is genuinely willing to be open and honest and grow and develop.
Okay.
Somebody that, although this isn't a requirement, somebody that's willing to look with me in the way that you've described, quite deep and across the spectrum of personal and business, and somebody actually, it picks up on an earlier point, somebody that actually gives feedback and signals on what they're getting from the coaching. In other words, they're not, some coachees are pretty hard to read, you know, and you have to probe a bit to whether it's valuable. Or so. But I prefer the people that give feedback, and also to some extent are willing to take control of the agenda and prepare and say, I want to look at this today. So that would be a sort of generic best client.
So people who take initiative, who take responsibility, who are, let's say, maybe we can say who are leaders. Or
yes,
or
exactly, leader. I almost, these days I really only work with leaders, so yes, absolutely.
Right. Okay, and then our sixth question is, I
Yes.
don't know if you want to mention names, but...
I won't mention names, but I will mention sort of types of people, and I won't mention names simply because of the confidentiality aspect.
Okay.
In terms of business people, I think you probably know, Alex, I'm reputed to have worked with more CEOs and managing directors than anybody else in this country.
Okay.
So I have worked with a great number of CEOs of, say, the FTSE 200 companies. So I've worked with lots of the business leaders in the country and to some extent internationally. I've worked with a lot of, not recently, this is some years ago, but I worked with a lot of famous sports people. So for instance, I worked with, I'll mention these names, the British pentathlon team as they led up to the Olympics. I worked with our discus and our shot putter, Olympic athlete who gained a silver medal at the. Sadly, it wasn't a gold, but a silver medal at the Olympics. I worked with Norwich City football team and so on. So, I worked with one of the England cricket captains and so on. So, famous sports people. And then, in terms of another arena. It was before I worked with, interestingly, one of our prime ministers before they became prime minister, and the chairman of the Conservative Party before they became chairman of the Conservative Party. So very high-profile political people. So that kind of gives you a flavour.
Okay. And number 7?
Yes. I have coached priests, not yogis or monks. So priests and preachers. My overwhelming experience of them was one of the big challenges, and whether this is true for everybody or just for the people I was working with, it was excruciatingly difficult for them to be authentic. In other words, they were to some extent figuring out how a priest ought to be and behave and trying to fit themselves into it. And secondly, in working with them in groups, or one-to-one, it was not, in those days, it may have changed, but in those days it was not a culture in... It was in the world of the Church of England at the time. It was not a culture then of great openness and honesty between priests and so on. Now, whether that may well have changed, so I don't want to imply that's necessarily true now. But so they were very available for coaching and very needy in the sense of there were certain things that I could address with them that they wouldn't be able to address in other places, and that would include for one or two of them a real soul searching about what they were doing, whether it was the right thing for them, were they doing it as well as they could, and so on. I mean, I think it's quite a challenge in life if one believes one's on almost a higher calling or a really, important mission, and then begin to ask questions about it. That's even more difficult. That's a tough existential place to be.
Right.
It's a sort of macro version of if you're a managing director of a company and you're wondering whether you want to keep doing it. That's a pretty tough thing to look at, particularly if you've been on that route for many, many years. But I think it's almost exacerbated if you weave in the meaning dimension of priests and so on. They think they're on a higher calling, and in some cases doing the only thing that they think is worth, well, not the only thing worth doing in life, but a very important thing to be doing in life. So if they begin to question that, that's a very tough thing to confront.
So did they sometimes ask you for advice?
They sometimes asked for advice. I always respond to requests from advice in the sense of, I will give you some, it's not just semantics this, I will give you some suggestions, but until and unless they absolutely make sense for you, they're valueless. In other words, don't ever take anything I say as absolute or even the right answer or anything. The word advice has unfortunate connotations to me, because advice implies I know what you should do in life. And actually I don't know what people should do in life. I only want to lead them to them seeing what they should do in life, and that's not just semantics. That's a paradigm, different place to come from.
Now, here I am becoming really curious.
Yes.
Do you know work of Stephen Covey?
Yes.
So he speaks about principles.
Yes.
Natural laws.
Yes.
Now, if a coach lives a principled life, or he tries to be a principle-centered person, tries to align himself with some natural laws like trust, morality,
yes,
doing good to people like this, and then he on the other hand he tries to do non-directive coaching.
Yes.
And he or she doesn't try to interfere with people's free will.
Yes.
How do you deal with this, your own value system, and then trying to help people live better lives? And like, you believe that if you are, for example, charitable, that this is very good, but your client maybe doesn't think so. So
yes,
how do you resist this urge to influence them?
Fantastic question. Two or three responses. One is, I think values and principles can be discovered in life. In other words, universality, if there are universal principles and values in life, they can be discovered.
Do you think they exist?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I answered that very hastily. I think that there's evidence that I experience in my life that two things. One is, certain principles seem to be universal in people if you can get through to them and let them emerge. So there seems to be a commonality of principles amongst people.
Okay.
And secondly, those principles seem to enable people to live better lives. So in other words, there's a relationship between principles and quality of life.
Right.
Where they come from, whether they're, whether they're genetic, whether, there's a spiritual being, etc., is a different question. But so I do think that. So I don't try and lead people to any place in my coaching of them, be that a very pragmatic how they should spend their time, right across to something that has to do with life principles. I genuinely don't try and lead anybody anywhere. In that sense, I'm absent in the sessions. Because I think that as soon as I try to lead somebody somewhere, that's presumptuous and dangerous. Presumptuous because how would I know what's right for them, and dangerous because it may not be. And thirdly, it smacks too much of me playing God, of being, or to use another model, a parent-child kind of model from transactional analysis. Me parent tell you child what you should do. So I think I genuinely don't try and lead people to anywhere, including the principles I hold. And I have I'm pretty good watching the voice in my head while coaching is going on. In other words, if I see, I can kind of be attentive to my own process at the same time as paying a lot of attention to the coachee.
Ooh,
so
that's not easy. At least for me.
No, I think it's that's developable. I think one thing that I got from the work that all the stuff that I did, particularly in the 60s and 70s, I described on, in quotes, on working on me. I think one thing it did help me do was be a little bit more able to watch my inner world, moment to moment, and therefore not have as much power over me. Begging the question what the me is in that, but that's a whole another conversation.
Okay.
So I think you're asking a terrific question. I just get uncomfortable about coaches leading people to places. That's not to say that we shouldn't challenge people. We shouldn't express where we feel anxious about what we're hearing, that we shouldn't speak up if we don't believe what we're hearing, that we should point out implications to our coachees if they're considering something in their life. So I don't mean that we don't care where they go.
Okay.
I think we own it.
Respect for their free will.
Yes, exactly. That's empowering. To me, one aspect of it came out perhaps in a slightly different way earlier on. You said it built self-reliance, that I completely agreed with that. Another way of saying that is I think coaching is also about empowering people to take more responsibility for their life, getting clear about what they wanted to in their life and take steps, etc., etc.
Right.
This is a lovely question as well. If some spiritual people ask you for life advice, what would you tell them? I suppose I would tell them, beware belief. I think beliefs are very dangerous because they tend to, by definition, become truths. And they tend to bounce up against other people's belief, and that's one of the things I think we see playing out in the world at the moment. Different belief systems bashing up against each other.
You mean belief in a religious sense?
Yes, in any sense.
You say in any sense, because on the other hand, coaches encourage people to accept empowering beliefs.
Operating principles. I'm making a distinction between a hard and fast belief that's unquestioned and unchallenged.
Absolutely.
It's a working hypothesis more than a belief. Now I tend to believe that the sun will rise tomorrow because it always has.
Yes.
But I don't know for sure. Yes. Now there's certain things. So yes, things that we come to see as beliefs and things that are right for us. All I'm making a distinction is beware holding those so strongly that they cease to be challengeable, that they cease to be looked at, that they start to be imposed on others as truth.
Right.
That's the distinction. I think that's one thing I'd say. I think another thing I'd say which relates to that is watch the voice in your head. And the final thing I would say to them, and I don't know whether you're familiar with this book from long, long ago, Tibetan Buddhist called Chogyam Trungpa wrote a book called something about spiritual materialism in the title. I would also say beware spiritual materialism. What I mean by that is beware thinking that relating things that I do to payoffs. In other words, if I say, how to say this, I see a very similar dynamic with people that I don't want to be critical because everybody finds their own way in life, but I find a lot of people that are on a spiritual path, in a very overt sense, they're rather materialistic about it. If I do this, that and the other, I will get a reward in heaven. It's like I'm doing a deal here, like a bit like if I go to Selfridges, I'll come back with a nice, Louis Vuitton bag. If I do this number of prayers and this, that, and the other, I'll get a payoff. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying beware that.
Right.
Rather than that people shouldn't do that. I'm just saying, I guess, see those things, keep some awareness in one's spiritual practice, in one's spiritual life, in one's. I hope I just beware imprisoning yourself.
Right.
And particularly beware the aspect of belief that bumps you up against other people in a negative sense that have different beliefs.
Okay.
Let's let different beliefs, if we must have them, coexist, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
I have read, as I think you've heard in this, I have read very widely on, the books you've mentioned here and many others. I think the ones, if I was to say what's had the biggest influence in my life, I'm certainly more up the Taoist and Buddhist end of things.
Right.
In terms of what's connected most with my work, but I think that's an influence rather overt. So I think the disciplines or the approaches that particularly look at I know this appears in the Christian disciplines as well, but man, know thyself. The disciplines that are really about self-awareness, looking inside, and so on. I've always sort of connected more with those than the routes that tend to be a bit more, at least the way they're played out, more about worship of a supreme being. Again, I'm not trying to say that one's right or wrong. I'm just saying the ones that I've connected more directly with. In terms of gurus, I think I've said, I've swung by various in my time. I suppose one of the most influential was Krishnamurti when he was alive. I found before he went off the rails, he became known as Osho, but earlier in his life he was Bhagwan Rajneesh. So there's been particular people that have sort of Hindu or Buddhist or Taoist leanings, but without I've found them very. I think I've probably got a lot from them without, as I say, ever sort of signing up with anybody in particular.
And what from any of these teachings that you have explored? Did anything in particular was helpful to developing your coaching skills or coaching approach?
I think it's at the macro level. It is to help people. I think it's the self-awareness method. I think it's some of those approaches are about raising self-awareness. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if it's a meditative process, when one is, watching one's breath and watching the thoughts come and go, that's essentially a self-awareness kind of approach. Okay. So I think the most influence on my work has been reinforcing my view that to help a coachee raise their awareness is a very valuable thing to do.
Okay.
And I probably should get to this last one,
yes.
Alex. The best life tip would be play whatever you're doing as if your life depends on it, always remembering it doesn't. So in other words, go for whatever you're doing with all of, really go for it, but always remember that your life doesn't depend on it.
But what would you you say life depends on?
I'm not sure it's the answer to your question. I think a macro quest for me in life, or a purpose, it's a bit like, what's the question we're going to be asked at the end of our lives, or ask ourselves? I guess the question I hope I'm asked is, did you lead a happy and fulfilled life? So I think finding a way to be happy and fulfilled, which, by the way, I think has a high correlation with helping other people be happy and fulfilled, is a value, a quest in life. That's a slightly different answer to your question, which I'm not sure.
That's okay. I would like to ask you at the end this question that probably you're familiar with.
Yes.
I think it's a very interesting question, and it's also interesting to ask people who are basically have dedicated their lives to helping others, like yourself. So imagine that you have left your body,
yes,
and there is your funeral going on.
Yes.
And people are coming forward to say something.
Yes.
So what is it that you would like to hear?
That he enhanced my life. His life enhanced my life.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think we have covered all the questions, although we have also spoken about some other things that we didn't plan about.
Yes.
But I don't mind.
And I don't mind.
And I think they have enriched the interview. These other things.
Well, thank you, Alex. I hope, as I say, you got what you wanted. I found, by the way, I think, if I may be a bit presumptuous here, I think the questions you're asking, both the ones you sent me and your supplementary questions, reveal a lot of depth and wisdom in you. So, I mean, I often wouldn't be answering this kind of question because the person wouldn't go there or be able to go there. So I think that's a tribute to you, and I found the questions very stimulating.
Thank you very much. I think I have got from this interview much more than expected. You have exceeded my expectations.
Thank you.
And I will type it and I will study this like ebook or something.
Well, thank you. And if we can find a way, yes, if you could send something to Kate, then we can either
How far are you from Oxford Street?
I'm quite close. I'm in Hampstead.
Hampstead, because I could come and deliver the tape to her. I don't want to send it by mail.
I'll get her to collect it from you. Where are you? You're
I'm in Soho Street.
Yes. What I'll do is, she's actually not well at the moment, but I'll get her to set up with you and come and collect it.
But could you give me some time to transcribe it?
Yes, of course.
Like that. And another question.
Actually, I know your place. It's off Soho Square, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know where it is. Yeah.
Now, I would like to ask you if it would be possible to meet you in person, and if it's possible, I would like to invite you to our restaurant, which is in Soho Street. It's a very nice restaurant, and many people say that the food is very, very nice. So I
have eaten in there in my time, so I would be delighted to do that. It will be a little while ahead given my schedule, Alex, but I would be very happy to do that.
Well, if you can just tell me, shall I contact you in a few weeks regarding that, or in a few months?
Yes. What I would suggest is if you could towards the end of September, when I've got through a sort of travel schedule and so on, that'd be great.
Towards the end of
and you can fix that up through Kate.
Okay.
Terrific.
and we can just have a lunch and
Yeah, that'd be great.
like this. And if you like, I can show you around or whatever.
Yes.
But then if you have time. But the main thing is the food, because I think the food is very nice, and I would like it to taste our.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Alexander, thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Alex. All the very best in everything you're doing, and we'll connect during September.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.